Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I never imagined my own brother would betray me. Sure, we had our fights growing up. What siblings don't? But deep down, I thought we had each other's backs. That belief shattered the day I discovered he had stolen my identity to open secret bank accounts. And as if that wasn't bad enough, when I decided to press charges, my parents turned on me instead of him. It started innocently enough. A letter from a bank I didn't recognize. It mentioned an overdue balance on a credit card I had supposedly opened. My first thought was that it was some kind of scam. I didn't have a card with that bank, so I tossed the letter aside, figuring it was a mistake. But a week later, a second letter arrived, this time warning about the account being sent to collections. That was when the alarm bells started ringing. I called the bank to clear up what I assumed was a misunderstanding. The customer service rep asked me to verify the account by providing some basic details. When she read back the contact information listed, my stomach dropped. The phone number, the email, even the address, it all belonged to my brother. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe the bank had made a mistake. But the more I looked into it, the clearer it became. I requested copies of the account statements, and when they arrived, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. There were multiple accounts, all opened under my name but linked to my brother's contact information. The charges included everything from restaurant bills to electronics, luxury items I'd never even dreamed of buying. It wasn't just a one-time slip-up. This was deliberate, calculated fraud. I spent the next few days trying to wrap my head around it. Could my brother really have done this? And if so, why? We weren't particularly close, but we weren't enemies either. How could he betray me like this, knowing how much damage it could cause? I decided I needed answers. Before jumping to conclusions, I wanted to hear his side of the story. I called him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, can we meet up? I need to talk to you about something important." He sounded casual, even cheerful, as he agreed to meet. That nonchalant tone only made my suspicion grow. When I arrived at his apartment with the account statements in hand, I didn't waste any time. "Do you recognize this?" I asked, holding up the papers. His face went blank for a second, but he quickly recovered. "What is that?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "These are bank accounts opened under my name. Your phone number, your email, your address, it's all here." "What the hell, man?" he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, it's not a big deal," he said, as if we were talking about borrowing a pair of socks. "I needed some extra cash and I knew you'd be fine." "Fine," I repeated, my voice rising. "You stole my identity and racked up thousands of dollars in debt. How could you possibly think I'd be okay with that?" He tried to brush it off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that he would pay it back eventually. But his cavalier attitude only made me angrier. This wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about the bond we were supposed to share as siblings. "I can't believe you," I said, my voice shaking. "You didn't even think about what this would do to me, did you?" "Come on," he said, rolling his eyes. "You're acting like I ruined your life or something. It's just a few accounts." "Just a few accounts?" I repeated. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to fix something like this? Do you even care?" His lack of remorse left me speechless. I walked out of his apartment that day, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I knew I couldn't let this slide, but I also knew that holding him accountable would come at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. Once all the pieces fell into place, the truth was undeniable. My brother had stolen my identity. The betrayal felt like a knife in the back. It wasn't just the financial mess he'd left me to deal with. It was the calculated way he'd done it, using my name and trust as tools for his own gain. I couldn't let it go. Ignoring it would only make me complicit, and I needed answers. So, with the account statements in hand, I drove to his apartment, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. When he opened the door, he looked surprised but not alarmed. "Hey, what's up?" he said casually, as if nothing was wrong. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, shoving the papers into his hands. He scanned the documents, his brow furrowing in mock confusion. "I don't know what this is," he said, handing them back like they were meaningless scraps of paper. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice sharp. "These accounts were opened in my name, but all the contact information points to you. Your phone number, your email, your address. Are you seriously going to stand there and pretend you don't know anything about this?" For a moment, he held his ground, feigning innocence. But as I laid out more evidence, The cracks in his story began to show. Finally, he sighed and threw up his hands. Fine, he said. Yeah, I did it. But it's not a big deal, okay? I stared at him, stunned. Not a big deal? You stole my identity and racked up thousands of dollars in debt. How is that not a big deal? He rolled his eyes, as if I were the one overreacting. You weren't using your credit anyway, he said. And I needed the money. It's not like I was trying to hurt you or anything. His casual tone sent my blood boiling. You needed the money? I repeated. So you thought stealing from me was the solution? You didn't even ask for help. You just decided to screw me over and hope I wouldn't find out? Calm down, he said, waving me off. I was going to pay it back eventually. You're acting like I robbed a bank or something. No, I shot back. You didn't rob a bank. You robbed me. Do you have any idea how much damage you've done? My credit is trashed because of you. Do you even care about that? For the first time, he looked uncomfortable, but it wasn't enough to make him apologize. Look, I get that you're mad, he said, but I didn't think it would be such a big deal. You're making this way more dramatic than it needs to be. His complete lack of remorse left me speechless. I had come here hoping for an explanation, maybe even an apology, but instead, I was met with indifference and excuses. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. You don't get it, do you? I said finally. This isn't just about the money. You broke my trust. How am I supposed to believe anything you say or do after this? Come on, he said, sounding annoyed. It's not like I killed someone. I made a mistake, okay? Can't you just let it go? Let it go? I repeated, incredulous. Do you even hear yourself? You don't get to play the victim here. You did this. You put me in this position. He shrugged, as if the conversation was over. Look, I'll figure it out, he said. I'll fix it. Just stop freaking out. But I couldn't stop freaking out. Not when the evidence of his betrayal was sitting in my hands. As I left his apartment that day, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and frustration. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated, and personal. And as much as I wanted to give him the chance to make things right, I wasn't sure if I could trust him to follow through. Sitting across from my brother in his small, cluttered living room, I struggled to comprehend what I was hearing. He was explaining, no, justifying, how he had stolen my identity as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Look, I was in a tight spot, he said, his tone calm, almost casual. I didn't have any other options. You don't understand what it's like to feel that desperate. I stared at him, disbelief etched into every corner of my face. And stealing from me was your solution? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. You didn't even ask for help. You just decided to screw me over without even thinking about the consequences. Your family, he said, shrugging. I knew you wouldn't mind. That sentence was like a slap in the face. Wouldn't mind? I snapped, my voice rising. You've trashed my credit, opened secret accounts, and left me to deal with debts I didn't even know existed. How could you possibly think I wouldn't mind? He rolled his eyes, as if I were the unreasonable one. It's not like I hurt anyone, he said. You're acting like this is some huge crime when it's not. I needed the money, and you weren't using your credit anyway. His indifference stung more than the betrayal itself. This wasn't just about the money, though the financial fallout was bad enough. It was about trust, about the principle of what he had done. How could he sit there, so nonchalant, as if his actions hadn't upended my entire life? Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, leaning forward. This isn't just some little mistake. This is fraud. Identity theft. It's a crime, and I'm the one paying for it. He shrugged again, his apathy pushing me closer to the edge. I was going to pay it back, he said, as if that made it okay. I just needed more time. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. You didn't just steal money, I said through gritted teeth. You stole my name, my reputation, my financial stability. Do you have any idea how hard it is to fix something like this? Do you even care? For the first time, he looked a little uncomfortable. Look, I get that you're upset, he said, but you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. It's not like I ruined your life or anything. Not yet, I shot back. But do you have any idea how close you came? What if I hadn't caught this? What if it had gone further? I could have lost everything because of you. His eyes darted away, but he didn't say anything. It was clear he hadn't considered the long-term consequences of his actions, or maybe he just didn't care. What do you want me to say? He asked after a long silence. I messed up, okay? But I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I didn't know what else to do. And what about now? I asked, crossing my arms. What's your plan for fixing this? Or are you just hoping it'll go away? He sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'll figure something out, he said vaguely. Just give me some time. His lack of a real plan infuriated me. Time? I repeated. You've already had time. And all you've done is dig me into a deeper hole. Do you even have any intention of making this right? Of course I do, he said defensively. But it's not going to happen overnight. Maybe not, I said, standing up. But I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to figure something out. I'm done being the one who has to clean up your messes. As I walked out of his apartment, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and frustration. I had come here hoping for some kind of resolution, but all I'd gotten were excuses and empty promises. Driving home, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could keep trying to handle this quietly, hoping he'd eventually take responsibility. Or I could take the hard road and hold him accountable, even if it meant tearing our family apart. In my gut, I knew what I had to do. But the thought of what would come next made my stomach churn. After confronting my brother, it became clear he wasn't going to take responsibility for the mess he had created. The debts he had racked up in my name weren't going to vanish on their own, and ignoring the situation would only make things worse. I knew I had to take action, but before making any big decisions, I decided to tell my parents. I thought they'd be outraged, furious even. What parent wouldn't be upset to learn that one of their children had stolen from the other? I expected anger and support, maybe even a promise to help me hold my brother accountable. But what I got instead left me reeling. When I told them everything, showed them the account statements, explained how my brother had stolen my identity, and detailed the financial chaos he had caused, their initial reaction was disbelief. Are you sure? My dad asked, frowning at the papers in his hand. This doesn't sound like him. Of course I'm sure, I replied, exasperated. All the evidence points to him. His phone number, his email, his address, it's all right there. He even admitted to it when I confronted him. My mom looked between me and the papers, her brow furrowed. There has to be an explanation, she said. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he thought you'd understand. Understand? I snapped, incredulous. He stole my identity and trashed my credit. What part of that am I supposed to understand? Instead of siding with me, my mom's tone shifted, taking on a pleading edge. He's your brother, she said softly. You're really going to ruin his life over this? He made a mistake, but he's family. Can't you work this out between yourselves? Her words hit me like a slap. Ruin his life? I repeated, my voice rising. He's the one who put my life at risk. And now you expect me to just let it go because he's my brother? My dad chimed in, trying to play the role of peacemaker. Look, we're not saying what he did was right, he said. But families don't handle things like this through the courts. We handle it privately. You don't want to drag this out and make it worse for everyone, do you? I stared at them, disbelief coursing through me. You're acting like I'm the one who did something wrong, I said. I'm the victim here, and instead of supporting me, you're making excuses for him. Why? Because he's the golden child who can do no wrong? That's not fair, my mom said, her voice trembling. We're just trying to keep this family together. Pressing charges won't solve anything. It'll only make things worse. I shook my head, anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. No, what'll make things worse is doing nothing, I said firmly. He's not going to fix this on his own, and I'm not going to let him get away with it. Their silence spoke volumes. For the first time, I realized just how deep their blind loyalty to my brother ran. It didn't matter what he had done or how much harm he had caused. They would always find a way to justify his actions. He's not a bad person, my mom said finally, her voice almost a whisper. He just made a bad decision. Can't you forgive him? I looked her in the eye, my voice steady. Forgiveness doesn't mean ignoring the consequences. He broke the law, and he broke my trust. If he doesn't face the consequences, what's to stop him from doing it again? My dad sighed heavily, setting the papers down on the table. You're both our kids, he said. We can't take sides in this. You already have, I shot back. And it's not mine. Leaving their house that day, I felt more alone than ever. My own parents had chosen to defend my brother rather than support me, the one he had hurt. The betrayal stung almost as much as the initial discovery of what my brother had done. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the account statements in my lap. My family wanted me to let this go, to sweep it under the rug for the sake of peace. But I couldn't do that. Not when my brother had shown no remorse and my parents refused to hold him accountable. The decision weighed heavily on me, but in the end, I knew what I had to do. If my family wasn't willing to stand by me, I'd stand alone. The tension in the room was suffocating. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression stern. Families don't handle things like this in court, he said firmly. We keep it between us. His words only fueled my frustration. Keeping it between us isn't going to fix anything, I said, my voice shaking. Do you even understand the gravity of what he did? This isn't just about the money, it's about trust. He put me in financial jeopardy, and you're acting like it's no big deal. My mom sighed, rubbing her temples. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said. Yes, he made a mistake, but pressing charges? That's extreme. Do you really want to tear this family apart over a misunderstanding? Misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulous. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. He knew exactly what he was doing when he opened those accounts. He lied, he stole, and now I'm left cleaning up his mess. How is that not worth addressing? My dad shook his head, his disapproval evident. You're letting your anger cloud your judgment, he said. This is a family matter, not something for the courts. Do you know what a criminal record would do to him? He'd never recover from it. And what about me? I shot back. What about my credit, my reputation, my peace of mind? Or does none of that matter because I'm the one who has to pick up the pieces? They exchanged a look, and I could see the divide between us widening. It wasn't just about my brother anymore. It was about their refusal to acknowledge the harm he had caused. My mom's voice softened, but her words still cut deep. He's your brother, she said. We're supposed to protect each other, not tear each other down. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him? Forgive him? The idea felt like a cruel joke. I can't forgive someone who doesn't even think they did anything wrong, I said. He's not sorry, and he hasn't taken any steps to fix what he's done. Why should I let him off the hook? Because he's family, my dad said firmly, and family comes first. Always. I felt like I was banging my head against a wall. No matter how much I tried to make them see my side, they were determined to protect my brother at all costs. As the conversation dragged on, it became clear that their loyalty to him outweighed their concern for me. You're overreacting, my mom said again. This isn't worth tearing the family apart over. I stood up, my hands trembling with anger. I'm not the one tearing the family apart, I said. He did that the moment he decided to steal from me. And the fact that you're defending him instead of holding him accountable? That's on you. My dad's face darkened. You'll regret this, he said. If you go through with pressing charges, don't expect us to stand by you. His words hit me like a gut punch, but I refused to back down. If standing by me means enabling him, then maybe I don't need your support, I said, my voice steady despite the tears welling in my eyes. As I left their house, the weight of their disapproval settled heavily on my shoulders. I had hoped for understanding, for solidarity, for the support that family is supposed to provide. Instead, I walked away feeling more isolated than ever. Their loyalty to my brother wasn't just disappointing. It was a betrayal of its own. They weren't just asking me to let it go. They were asking me to prioritize their comfort over my own dignity. Driving home, I resolved to move forward on my own. If my parents couldn't see the harm my brother had caused, I would take the steps necessary to protect myself, even if it meant facing their anger and disappointment. The fallout had already begun, and I had no doubt it would only get worse. But I couldn't let their opinions dictate my choices, not when so much was at stake. Despite my parents' pleas and the guilt they tried to lay on me, I knew I couldn't let my brother's actions slide. Ignoring what he had done would only enable him to continue down this path, and the financial and emotional damage he had caused me couldn't be undone with empty promises. I sat down at my kitchen table, the account statements spread out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I wished I didn't have to solve. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and called the authorities. The officer on the other end listened patiently as I explained the situation, and by the time the call ended, my hands were shaking. Filing the report was just the beginning. The next few days were filled with grueling steps, filling out endless forms, answering invasive questions, and compiling every shred of evidence I had. It was exhausting, both emotionally and mentally. But as difficult as it was, I knew it was necessary. When my brother found out what I had done, his reaction was explosive. He called me late one evening, his voice filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're seriously doing this?" he yelled. "You're actually pressing charges? Against me? Your own brother?" "I gave you a chance to fix this," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "But you didn't care. You acted like it was no big deal and left me to deal with the mess you made. You left me no choice. I said I'd pay you back," he shouted. But no, you couldn't wait. You had to go and ruin my life instead. You ruined your own life, I shot back. I didn't force you to steal my identity. That was all you. The conversation devolved into a shouting match, with him accusing me of being heartless and me countering with the cold, hard truth. He had brought this on himself. You're unbelievable, he said finally, his tone venomous. You've always acted like you're better than me. Well, congrats, you win. You've destroyed our family. No, I said firmly. You destroyed our family the moment you decided to betray me. Don't try to pin this on me. He hung up, and I sat there in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on me. As much as I hated what he had done, it still hurt to hear him say those things. The legal process moved slowly, each step feeling like an uphill battle. I had to recount the details of his actions over and over again, each time reopening the wound. There were moments when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. My parents, of course, weren't shy about voicing their disapproval. My mom called constantly, begging me to reconsider. He's your brother, she said during one particularly heated conversation. Is this really worth tearing the family apart over? If the family's torn apart, it's because of him, not me, I said firmly. Stop blaming me for holding him accountable. My dad, though less emotional, was just as critical. You're making a mistake, he told me. This is something we could have handled privately. You didn't have to take it this far. Maybe if you had held him accountable earlier, it wouldn't have come to this, I snapped, the frustration bubbling over. But since you refused to do anything, I had to. Their disappointment stung, but I tried to focus on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me. It was about setting boundaries and refusing to let someone else's bad decisions define my life. As the weeks went on, I started to hear whispers from other family members. Some sided with my parents, believing I was overreacting. Others quietly supported me, saying they understood why I had taken such drastic steps. The mixed reactions only added to the emotional toll, but I stood by my decision. My brother's actions had consequences, and it was time for him to face them. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The fallout from my decision to press charges hit harder than I had anticipated. My parents, who had already expressed their disapproval, became openly hostile. Every phone call, every family gathering turned into an opportunity for them to criticize me. He made a mistake, my mom said during one particularly tense conversation. Everyone deserves a second chance. But instead, you're treating him like a criminal. Because he is a criminal, I shot back, frustration boiling over. What he did wasn't some harmless mistake. It was calculated. He stole from me, lied to me, and then acted like it wasn't a big deal. How can you not see that? But no matter how much I tried to make them understand, they refused to listen. In their eyes, I wasn't the victim. I was the villain for daring to hold him accountable. My dad's criticism was more subtle, but just as cutting. You could have handled this differently, he said one evening. Dragging him through the legal system isn't going to fix anything. It's just going to make things worse. For who? I asked. For him or for me? Because right now, I'm the one dealing with the consequences of his actions, while you're all busy making excuses for him. His expression hardened. We're not excusing what he did, he said. We just think you're overreacting. Families are supposed to protect each other, not tear each other apart. Protect each other? I repeated, incredulous. Where was that protection when he was stealing my identity and ruining my credit? Where was it when I was left to clean up his mess? The conversation ended in silence, but the damage was already done. My parents weren't just refusing to take my side. They were actively working to shield my brother from the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, my brother doubled down on his attempts to paint himself as the victim. Words spread quickly through our extended family, and before long, I started hearing whispers about how I was going too far and destroying his life. He's been through a lot, one cousin said during a family barbecue. Maybe you could have handled this privately, without getting the courts involved. He's not the only one who's been through a lot, I replied. I'm the one who's been cleaning up his mess. Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up one day and realize someone you trusted has been stealing from you? The cousin looked uncomfortable, but didn't push the issue further. It was clear that many people in the family didn't know the full extent of what had happened, or didn't want to know. As the tension escalated, I found myself increasingly isolated. My parents barely spoke to me except to criticize my actions, and my brother made no effort to apologize or take responsibility. Instead, he leaned into the narrative that I was blowing things out of proportion, turning the family against me in the process. But despite the loneliness and the judgment, I stood my ground. I'm not the one who tore this family apart, I told my mom during another heated argument. He did that when he decided to betray me. All I'm doing is holding him accountable. You're punishing him, she replied, her voice trembling. And for what? Money? Is it really worth losing your family over this? This isn't about money, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about trust. And right now, the only person tearing this family apart is the one who broke it in the first place. As the legal case progressed, the rift in the family deepened. Some relatives sided with me, quietly expressing their support and urging me to stay strong. Others avoided me entirely, unwilling to get involved. Through it all, I clung to the belief that I was doing the right thing. My brother's actions had consequences, and someone needed to hold him accountable. Even if it meant standing alone, I wasn't going to back down. But as the weeks turned into months, the weight of the situation began to take its toll. The constant tension, the whispered judgments, and the strained relationships left me questioning whether justice was worth the price I was paying. The legal process felt like an endless uphill battle, a slow grind of hearings, paperwork, and tense interactions with lawyers. But after months of back and forth, my brother finally had to face the consequences of his actions. He was formally charged with identity theft and fraud, and while the penalties weren't as harsh as they could have been, the experience seemed to shake him in a way my words never could. During the sentencing, I sat in the back of the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge read out his decision. My brother avoided looking at me the entire time. His shoulders were slumped, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely remorseful. The sentence included community service, mandatory financial counseling, and restitution payments to cover the debts he had created in my name. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I was left with a heavy sense of sadness. This was my brother, someone I had shared holidays, birthdays, and childhood memories with, and now he was sitting in a courtroom, facing the fallout of choices that had torn our family apart. For me, the hardest part of the entire ordeal wasn't the legal proceedings, or even the emotional toll of dealing with my brother's betrayal. It was the relentless judgment from my family. My parents had grown colder and more distant with every passing week. Our phone calls became infrequent, and when we did speak, the conversation always circled back to their disappointment in me. "I hope you're happy," my mom said during one particularly painful conversation. "Your brother is going through hell right now, and it's all because of you." "No," I replied firmly. "He's going through hell because of his own decisions. I didn't make him steal from me. I didn't make him lie or rack up debt in my name. Those were his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." But no matter how much I tried to explain, they refused to see my side. To them, I wasn't a victim. I was the one who had escalated things by involving the authorities. The tension extended beyond my immediate family. Relatives who once greeted me warmly now gave me wary glances at gatherings, unsure of where their loyalties should lie. Some openly criticized me, saying I should have found a way to handle things privately. "He's your brother," one aunt said, shaking her head in disapproval. "You could have found another way. Family is supposed to protect each other, not tear each other apart." Hearing those words stung, but I refused to let them sway me. "Family doesn't steal from each other," I replied. "And if holding him accountable means I'm the bad guy, then so be it." Not everyone was against me, though. A few relatives quietly expressed their support, telling me I had done the right thing. "It took guts to stand up to him," one cousin said. "He needed a wake-up call, and you gave it to him." Those moments of validation were rare, but they reminded me that I wasn't alone in this, even if it often felt that way. As my brother began fulfilling the terms of his sentence, I noticed a shift in his behavior. The arrogance and defensiveness that had characterized our earlier confrontations were replaced by something more subdued. One afternoon, he called me unexpectedly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm going to do everything I can to make it right." His apology caught me off guard. For months, I had been waiting for him to acknowledge the pain he had caused, but now that it was happening, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me couldn't forget the lies, the excuses, and the betrayal. "I appreciate that," I said cautiously, "but it's going to take time. This isn't something that can be fixed overnight." "I know," he said. "I just want you to know that I'm trying." As difficult as it was to navigate the fallout, I stood by my decision to press charges. My brother's actions had consequences, and holding him accountable wasn't just about justice. It was about setting boundaries and protecting myself. "He's an adult," I told my parents during yet another tense conversation. He made these choices, and now he has to deal with the fallout. That's not on me. But no matter how much I explained, they refused to let go of their anger. You could have handled this differently, my dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. You didn't have to ruin his life. I didn't ruin his life, I replied. I gave him the chance to fix this, and he ignored it. If he's suffering now, it's because of the decisions he made, not because of me. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my own life. The debts my brother had created were being paid off little by little, and while my credit was still recovering, I finally felt like I was moving in the right direction. The rift in my family remained, but I had come to accept that some things might never fully heal. My parents might never understand why I had done what I did, and my brother and I might never return to the relationship we once had. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what was necessary to protect myself, and no amount of judgment or criticism could take that away. After the legal case was resolved, I finally had the space to focus on rebuilding my life. It wasn't an overnight process. My credit, once pristine, had taken a significant hit, and the debts my brother had accumulated in my name loomed like a shadow over every financial decision I made. I spent hours on the phone with banks and credit bureaus, explaining the situation over and over again. While some accounts were flagged and removed from my credit history due to the identity theft case, others required months of back and forth before they were resolved. It felt like every step forward was met with a new hurdle, but I refused to give up. Each small victory, an account cleared, a credit score point restored, felt like reclaiming a piece of the life my brother had tried to steal from me. Slowly but surely, I began to see progress. I got back on track with my financial goals, and the weight of his betrayal started to feel a little less heavy. Amid all this, I was surprised when my brother reached out. It had been weeks since we'd last spoken, and I wasn't sure what to expect when I saw his name flash on my phone. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, but curiosity, and maybe a lingering hope for closure, got the better of me. When I answered, his voice was quieter than I remembered, stripped of the defensiveness and arrogance that had defined our earlier conversations. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he began, his words slow and deliberate. Not just for what I did, but for how I treated you when you called me out. His apology caught me off guard. For months, I had waited for him to acknowledge the pain he had caused, but hearing him admit to his selfishness and lack of accountability felt surreal. I was selfish, he admitted. I didn't think about how it would affect you, and I was wrong to dismiss your feelings. I know an apology doesn't fix everything, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. His words were a step in the right direction, but they didn't erase the pain or the damage he had caused. I appreciate you saying that, I replied cautiously. But this isn't just about an apology. What you did had real consequences, for me, for my credit, and for our family. It's going to take time to rebuild that trust. I get that, he said, his voice filled with remorse. And I'm not expecting you to forgive me overnight. I don't want this to define our relationship forever. I want to make things right, even if it takes a long time. We ended the call on a tentative note, and while I wasn't ready to fully let my guard down, his willingness to take accountability felt like a small step toward healing. As I continued to rebuild my life, I started to realize how much the experience had changed me. It wasn't just about learning to protect myself financially, though that was an important lesson. It was about recognizing the importance of boundaries and accountability, even within family. My parents, though still distant, had softened slightly. They didn't openly criticize me as much, but there was still an undercurrent of tension whenever the topic of my brother came up. I had stopped trying to convince them to see my side. Instead, I focused on maintaining the parts of our relationship that didn't revolve around him. It wasn't easy, but I had come to accept that some wounds might never fully heal. My family dynamics might always carry the weight of what had happened, but I refused to let that define my future. Little by little, I began to find peace. I started reconnecting with friends and focusing on hobbies I had neglected during the chaos. I even managed to save enough to start planning a long overdue vacation, a reminder that life could still hold moments of joy and normalcy, even after such a painful chapter. Rebuilding wasn't just about fixing my credit or repairing my relationships. It was about rediscovering myself and reclaiming the life I wanted to live. And while the road ahead still had its challenges, I felt stronger and more resilient than ever. As I look back on everything that happened, it's clear that the ordeal taught me lessons I never expected to learn. The experience forced me to confront not only my brother's betrayal, but also the complexities of family dynamics, the importance of boundaries, and the power of accountability. It was painful and messy, but it also showed me what I was capable of enduring and overcoming. My relationship with my parents remains fragile. They haven't fully forgiven me for pressing charges against my brother, and sometimes, it feels like they never will. They still see my actions as a betrayal of the family, and despite my efforts to explain my perspective, there's a wall between us that wasn't there before. We talk, but the conversations are surface level, avoiding the deeper issues that divide us. I've come to accept that this may be our new normal. While I miss the closeness we once shared, I can't compromise my principles just to make them comfortable. As for my brother, things are complicated. After his sentencing and our tentative reconciliation, he began making efforts to show he had changed. He completed his community service and started attending the financial counseling sessions mandated by the court. He even began making restitution payments, though the process is slow and will likely take years to finish. We're talking again, albeit cautiously. Trust is hard to rebuild after something like this, and while I'm open to the possibility of repairing our relationship, I know it will take time. There are moments when I see glimpses of the brother I used to know, the one who made me laugh and had my back during tough times. But those moments are fleeting, overshadowed by the weight of what happened. I know I don't deserve your trust yet, he said during one of our recent conversations, but I'm going to keep trying to earn it. I want to be better, for you, for the family, and for myself. Hearing those words gave me a sliver of hope. While I can't forget what he did, I'm willing to give him the chance to prove he's changed. The biggest lesson I've taken away from this experience is that doing the right thing often means making the hardest choices. It would have been easier to let my brother's actions slide, to avoid the confrontation and the fallout. But doing so would have only enabled him, allowing the cycle to continue unchecked. Holding him accountable wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of love, though a painful one. By forcing him to face the consequences of his actions, I gave him the opportunity to grow and change. It's up to him now whether he seizes that opportunity or lets it slip away. For myself, I've learned the value of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I've learned that love and accountability can coexist, that protecting yourself doesn't mean abandoning others, and that sometimes the strongest relationships are the ones rebuilt after being broken. Moving forward, I'm focusing on the things I can control, my own growth, my goals, and the relationships that bring positivity and stability into my life. The scars from this chapter of my life will always be there, but they're a reminder of how far I've come and what I'm capable of overcoming. And as difficult as it was, I don't regret standing up for myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And for that, I'm proud.